I think it makes it clear to the world how important our supply chain is. When people are in the grocery store fighting over toilet paper, you realize that getting stuff where it needs to be when it needs to be there is fundamental to operation of our society, sort of civil operation of our society. Making sure that we've got a supply chain that can withstand these kind of disruptions, I think, is in everybody's best interests.
The Industrial Sage Executive Series, sharing the stories behind game-changing executives, their organizations, and insights into today's industry challenges. Welcome to today's Industrial Sage Executive Series interview. Today, I have the founder and CEO of Vecna Robotics, Daniel Theobald here. He's also the president and co-founder of Mass Robotics. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today on Industrial Sage.
My pleasure.
All right, did I get everything right? We'll just start with that. All good? Pronunciation? Perfect. All right, cool.
Yeah, you nailed it.
So for those who aren't familiar with Vecna Robotics and Mass Robotics, could you just give me sort of high level, like who you guys are, what you do?
Yeah, so Vecna Robotics is the global leader for automated bulk handling. Think moving pallets around or large, what are called non-conveyable items, kayaks, tires, carpets, those kind of things that we ship more and more today than we have in the past because of e-commerce. Mass Robotics is an industry association focused on trying to bring innovators, customers, and investors together in effective ways to move the industry forward. Also focusing a lot on practical interoperability standards. It's got a great co-working space in the Boston area. The whole goal is to help move the robotics industry as a whole forward.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it's obviously it's a huge space right now, and obviously because of all the COVID situation, I think is propelling it a little bit more than it already was hot and it was already moving, but I think even now it's being launched even forward that much faster. But before we get into all that, I want to get to know you a little bit, and for our audience to get to know you a little bit more. So take me back, how did you get into robotics? Was that did you go to did you get an undergrad in technology? Say, this is what I want to do. Tell me that story. How did you get into this?
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey. I was very fortunate to grow up in Silicon Valley in San Jose, and attended probably one of the first elementary schools in the world that had a computer lab. We had Commodore PET computers and Apple I's, believe it or not. And wow. So I was very fortunate to have access to computers in my formative years. And my father was very hands-on, so I helped him with construction. I fixed cars, motorcycles, built my own computers, built a number of robotics projects, and was very fortunate to get chosen as the top computer science student in all of California. And got to go to Lawrence Livermore National Lab and work on the Cray computer, which was the fastest supercomputer in the world at the time.
Wow!
So that was a really exciting opportunity. Yeah, then went on to MIT and essentially built my own degree program around robotics because they didn't have a robotics specific degree program, and have just really focused on this idea of using automation, using robotics to empower humanity.
That's awesome. All right, so obviously from a very young age, you were introduced to computers and technology. That's pretty cool to be able to have gone to that elementary school and have access to that at that point. So what was your coming out of college and stuff, what was your first job?
Well, my first job actually was working for I think about it, I had a lot of first jobs during college, programming, mostly software engineering focused. I did work for a couple of different robotics and machine vision companies, but that experience actually was really formative to me because it helped me to understand that the world was not quite ready for what I would call modern mobile robotic systems yet. Um, Even at that time, there was a lot of hype, a lot of excitement around robotics, but not a whole lot of practical applications. Right, the technology wasn't cost effective yet. The industry wasn't excited about trying to pull robots in. So it helped me to understand that timing was everything. So I actually started working out mostly on the software side of things and developed a number of major accounts with different healthcare systems deploying patient check-in technology. Basically, think of everything you see in the travel industry right now. You can buy your tickets online, you can check in online, you can check in at a kiosk at the airport. We did all that, but we did it for the healthcare industry. But during that whole time, we were investing heavily in robotics R&D research, and the 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 approach we took was to pursue government grants because that was one of the best ways to get robotics research money at the time. And over the years, we pulled in over $30 million in government research grants. But unlike a lot of companies, we were very disciplined about making sure that those research grants supported our product roadmap that got us to where we wanted to be. And we had a very strong thesis that we weren't going to try and scale up. We weren't going to try and push robots into the industry until we felt like the time was right. So we tried to be very disciplined about that, where a lot of organizations were spending a lot of investor money trying to push robots onto the industry that wasn't ready for it yet. We were instead really focusing on solving some of the hardest problems in automation and robotics, and I'm building up a great team and waiting for the time to be right to start to scale. So this idea of separation between hardware and software, for instance, is an idea that really enabled the computer industry, ultimately the cell phone industry, to move forward. We're not there yet with the robotics industry, but that's where we need to get. So same idea, the ability to find and run apps from different suppliers on hardware from different suppliers, the ability for a customer to buy robots from company A and have them plug and play with robots from company B, share maps if appropriate, share charging infrastructure if appropriate, share safety configurations. You shouldn't have to create traffic patterns and no-go zones and all of that for every new type of robot you bring in the facility. Things like a task allocation. A robot, you should be able to just bring a new robot to your facility, connect it to the network, register it with the warehouse management system, let's say, and then it should be able to receive tasks from that warehouse management system, report back its location, report back on progress of tasks. So it's the idea of just building all this common infrastructure so that automation suppliers can focus on specific applications rather than reinventing the wheel every time.
That makes sense. And I imagine from an onboarding standpoint and from an operating standpoint that it's, yeah, instead of learning everyone's wheel, a million times, oh, well, this one does it differently in that way. Yeah, it's a more of a, in layman's terms, plug and play.
Yeah, customers, exactly right. Customers don't want to have to be roboticists.
Yeah.
They want to be able to buy a product that solves their problem, and it should be quick and easy. So, I think we'll eventually get to the point where you can buy a robot and you can turn it on and it'll start working for you. Right now, the industry is got a bit of work to do before we get there.
Yeah, I can imagine, but it sounds like an exciting time. So.
Yeah, no, I think this is the this is the infancy of the true mobile robotics, intelligent robotics industry. So I think a lot of what we do now is going to have a big impact on the future. I mean, you think of a lot of the standards. The Internet Protocol, for example, was something that was designed decades ago in a research project at DARPA. And it is evolved, but it is the way we communicate on the internet. And I think a lot of what we do right now is going to have that same level of impact for the robotics industry for decades to come.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. Actually, as you're talking, relative to relative to the current situation with COVID and everything, and the industry, we're coming out of Modex, pre-Modex, post-Modex, pre-COVID, post-COVID. What are the big changes that you're seeing in the industry relative to robotics, like in the short term and then also in the long term because of the coronavirus?
Yeah, it's it has certainly shaken everything up. Clearly, the enthusiasm for automation has only increased. We see this across the board. The message that you can be more resilient, more flexible, safer with appropriate use of automation, I think, is really resonating with people. There are no question some slowdowns for some customers. A number of our customers have just moved full steam ahead and view this all as essential because they need it to get their work done. Others have had to focus more on coronavirus compliance with a lot of the new laws, or just trying to stay on top of things, and have temporarily paused some of their adoption efforts. But I think it makes it clear to the world how important our supply chain is. When people are in the grocery store fighting over toilet paper, you realize that getting stuff where it needs to be when it needs to be there is fundamental to operation of our society, sort of civil operation of our society. So making sure that we've got a supply chain that can withstand these kind of disruptions, I think, is in everybody's best interests. So yeah, the bottom line is that when you use technology appropriately, you can take advantage of the best qualities of humans and robots, humans and automation, and really achieve not only the best throughput that you can get, but you can do it in a way that is now more flexible than ever. It used to be that you would design a distribution facility or a warehouse, and it would operate largely unchanged from the way you designed it for 10 plus years. That world is gone now. That world no longer exists. Whether you're a distribution facility, a warehouse, a manufacturing facility, the only thing you can count on now is change, and change is happening more rapidly than ever. So you have to have automation technology that can roll with the punches. You can't have a system that took 2 years to install and is so specific to a particular way of doing things that when things change, you've lost that investment. One example, FedEx had a number of our robots deployed in their facility. They thought that facility was going to continue to do the same thing for quite a while, but something happened and things changed, and they needed to reallocate that facility to different tasks. Well, unlike traditional, sort of fixed automation that would just have to be scrapped or left unused, they were able to put our robots on a truck and take them to a new facility to get them back to work. So the investment they're making in automation now, that flexibility, that ability to adapt and change, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, those dollars are precious, and if you spend them on something that you never see the return on investment, you never have the time to see the return on investment, then not a good investment.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem. As you mentioned, change and having that flexibility is sort of the name of the game, and that's something. The only thing that we consistently, the only thing that's going to be, consistent is change, right? We know that that's especially now. And so the ability to be able to adapt to that is critical, absolutely critical.
Yeah, Yeah, that's right. And so I think one of the things that people don't necessarily appreciate is how amazing humans are.
Mm,
Elon Musk famously tweeted about this when he was talking about their effort on lights out automation. They wanted to essentially build a 100% automated factory, and he tweeted. He said, "I messed up. Um, I tried to over automate.
mm,
Humans are underrated."
mm,
And I think this is the key to success, is understanding that point. That doesn't mean automation isn't incredibly valuable and necessary. It is, but you have to find the right balance. And lights out automation, in most cases, 100% lights out doesn't make sense. It's not going to achieve that flexibility, that robustness to exceptions that you need in the real world. So the best scenario is when you can achieve superior results through orchestrating humans and robots most effectively to work together.
mm,
Why? Because humans are great at exception handling, right? Something unexpected happens. Human beings are amazing problem solvers. They're creative, they're innovative. We often don't give people enough credit. You think, oh, well, it's just a worker. No, that worker has figured out how to keep this line running. And it's interesting. I've visited numerous facilities, and generally first I'll meet with the executives, and the executives will say, "Oh, well, this is how our system runs. This is how we operate. These are the path through which the material flows." And then you go to the floor of the facility, and you start talking to the workers like, "Oh, well, I thought they said blah, blah, blah." I'd say, "Oh, no, 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 we don't do it that way. That's not the way it actually happens. That doesn't work. We actually do it this way." So there tends to be this disconnect between what, executives in these industrial companies think is happening on the
mm.
floor and what's actually happening on the floor. And yes, that's a problem, but it also is an indication of how amazing human beings are, that something's going on and it's not working. They just immediately adapt. They create local solutions to these problems. You don't want to give that up. You want to manage it effectively, but you don't want to lose that, or you end up in a place like Elon Musk was, with having a failed project.
Yeah, I mean
So
that's
we
super
believe,
interesting. Sorry, keep yeah,
yeah,
no.
we believe that automation, in some sense, is so last decade. This is really the decade for effective orchestration. And what we mean by that is you've got to use the best resource. You got to have the right resource in the right place at the right time. And maybe that's a piece of automation. Maybe that's a piece of manually operated equipment. Maybe that's a human being, a supervisor who's great at dealing with certain type of problems. But it's all about making sure that you are using the most effective tool at the right time. So, what our pivotal orchestration engine does is it monitors where everybody, all the equipment, all the people, all the robots are in real time within a facility. It knows where they are. It knows what tasks they are working on. The workers and the robots, et cetera, are constantly reporting back to Pivotal on their progress on their tasks or completion of tasks. And then Pivotal is doing this very dynamic, real time optimization of, okay, I know this needs to get done. What is the next best move I can make to ensure that this facility gets all of its work done as quickly as possible, with the minimum number of resources necessary? And a robot's going down an aisle, and a case has fallen off a pallet and is blocking the aisle. Um, the robot can try and deal with that, but maybe it can't. Maybe it was a case of Coke and there's Coke sprayed all over the place now. Um, the orchestration engine is able to realize that there's a problem and very quickly dispatch the right agent to solve that problem. And in this case, it's probably a human being, not a robot, right? We're not going to have a robot that's got a mop, that can go and wipe things down, in a dynamic situation like that anytime soon. So it says, hey, we've got a problem. I'm going to send a human being in to deal with this problem. And the benefit of this is that it allows humans to do what they're good at. It makes their jobs more enjoyable because they're not being treated like robots. They're doing interesting work that's really varied. We're supercharging their productivity because they're able to get a lot more work done with one person than they used to be. And it's better for everybody. One of the things that's really interesting given the COVID situation is, when you had the mandatory or at least strongly recommended social distancing in these facilities. Well, how do you implement that effectively? Well, one of the great things about Pivotal and the idea of real-time orchestration is you can just give it constraints. You can say, okay, yep, you gotta get all the work done, but now I'm going to make it a little harder for you, Pivotal. I'm going to tell you that people can't be within 6 feet of each other. Okay, now go out and solve that problem. And so, it's kind of like a grandmaster chess player. It's sitting up there. It's looking at what needs to get done. It's looking at the pieces it's got on the board to get that work done. And it's always forward simulating, trying to figure out which next move gives it the best chance of success.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting. I like your analogy about just being able to, and we'll call it real-time problem solve or adjust, make that flexibility. And in a really simplified version, it reminded me of that movie. There's a Disney movie. I got a few young kids, and they love watching this movie, Ants. And there's this scene where they're working, and they're moving the grain from one place to another, and there's a branch that just falls right in the middle of the path. And then they all start freaking out. Oh, there's a branch. What do we do? What do we do? And they say, all right, go around. And it just kind of funny. Yeah. It reminded me of that that explanation. To your point, you have to have that adaptability.
Yeah, exactly right. To the level where we've gone to certain customers who are really excited about buying robots, and after doing some analysis, some simulation, it's clear that they don't need robots. They just need better orchestration of their existing resources. Right? That's really, I think, the key point is, automation is great, but automation is not going to be good at every job.
Yeah.
There's some jobs that just have too much variability, and humans are great at that. And if you can orchestrate the humans' work effectively, you can really make the job more enjoyable too. So it's a win-win for everybody.
There's some great points because obviously robotics and automation, gets a knock from the workforce development side, and a lot of people are freaked out thinking, oh my gosh, this, robots and, all this autonomy is going to come in and take over our jobs. I actually was on a webinar a couple days ago, and there was a stat that they came in, and they were talking about how saying that robotics, I think in particular, would only take up actually solve 10% of the problem, whereas they're not going to come in and have a huge dramatic effect to that point where it's going to completely replace people. Is it going to replace some people?
Yeah.
Sure. And those people could probably be shifted into other areas, but it's not this massive takeover.
Yeah, and whenever people talk about robots replacing jobs, they're thinking from a point of a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a zero-sum game, right? They're thinking there's this much work to do. Yeah. And if robots start doing some percentage of this much work, then there's that much less work for humans to do, and therefore humans are going to be without jobs. Right. And it just doesn't work that way, right? The robots are really, automation is really just supercharging human productivity so that our humans can get more done than ever before. Everything else is kind of outside of this equation. How the economy is doing, demand for goods, international competition. Those are all the factors that determine how effective a particular business is. Businesses need to be able to compete. They need to be able to provide goods and services at a competitive price. That's what automation allows them to do. And if they do it effectively, their business thrives, they grow, they employ more people. And those people are more productive than they ever were before, right? I mean, back in the 1930s, 70% of the U.S. population worked in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? It took 70% of us to grow the food for us to survive. And you could say that automation, the tractor, replaced, made a bunch of people lose their jobs in agriculture. But that's probably not the appropriate analysis of that situation, right? The tractor made human workers far, far more productive, giving us the opportunity as a human race to do more than we ever could before, right? If 70% of our population was still working on growing our food, and then what does that leave? 30% for um, you know banking and healthcare and these other things. Would we have gotten to the moon? It's a great question. Having resources to dream, to do art, to educate the world. These are all things made possible um, precisely because technology allows us to be more efficient as a species.
Exactly, and it brings in competition, and maybe you're competing for that job, or you think about two competing businesses, but if you're competing for resources, what does that do? That creates innovation, and we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that right now with the whole coronavirus thing. Is that okay? We have a series of challenges. One way is looking at it as challenges, another way is looking at it as opportunities, and because of these constraints that we have, there's a lot more visibility and clarity into other areas you otherwise wouldn't have been able to see, and therefore new industries are born, new companies. So I think that's I love that analogy.
Yeah, it allows us to move forward, and really spend more time on the things that we value.
Yeah.
And on the whole, there's probably too much Netflix going on these days and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the fact that we have a choice in how we spend our time now
Yeah.
is a gift given to us by technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe
We're not out in the fields.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just to say, yeah, we're not out in the fields, 15 hours a day and, sitting behind a wash tub of dirty clothes
Yeah.
all day long.
No,
That used to be the plight of humanity.
Exactly. I just got to get food on the table, and here's how we're going to do that. So, and to kind of wrap on that note, I'm curious, and I'll ask this: what is your, with the whole quarantine and everything, what has your daily routine been like? Are there new habits that you've picked up?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate. I'm actually out here at our family farm in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, I get up on East Coast time and have a full day of meetings on the phone and video conferencing, and then come, late afternoon, I'm actually out working on the farm and planting and growing. But yeah, it is interesting. Vecna Robotics has been fortunate that we are able to continue to grow and thrive through this period. We know that is uncommon, so we don't take it for granted. We're very grateful for that. But we have continued to hire through this crisis, and it's interesting that I was reflecting the other day that we have 10 to 15 new people on the team who I've never met face to face. So this idea of working remotely has a lot of benefits, but it does lack some of the social. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It just lacks some of the uh, fun interactions that we would normally have, I think, in an office place.
Yeah,
Not getting to sit
exactly.
down with people, not getting to break bread with people, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we're definitely missing that.
It's certainly missed. It'll be a joyful party when this is all over, able to come back, to together again on that. But well, Daniel, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with me and IndustrialSage today, and just kind of talking about the industry changes, COVID, what you guys are doing, and hypothesizing on what might come about of this in the future. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, And we are also continuing to deploy technology right through this. So we have been able to deploy our robots to customers without setting foot in their facilities. So
Oh, that's awesome.
certainly, if any of your customers are looking to expand their workforce and introduce some automation, we can do that without traveling.
Absolutely. You go check out vecnarobotics.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Excellent. No problem. Well, thank you for joining me today, and we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for watching or listening to this episode that we had with Daniel Theobald from Vecna Robotics. Very interesting. Huge. A lot of big story we're hearing right now. Thanks to all the COVID stuff. We were hearing about it before, all the automation, the robotics, but certainly now that has been accelerated. So if you'd like to check out more about them, you can go visit their website, vecnarobotics.com, and we have some interviews and stuff from them from Modex and ProMet from last year. You can certainly check that out on the site as well. So that's it. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I will catch you next week with another episode of Industrial Sage. Industrial Sage is an open platform where companies can showcase their expertise and solutions to a captive audience of industrial professionals. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, please leave us a review. Want us to tell your story? Go to IndustrialSage.com. This week's episode was produced by Rika Wiersma, filming by Donovan Jones, editing by Rika Wiersma, music composed by Oliver Michael, and executive producers Danny Gonzalez and David Karen. This is the Industrial Sage Executive Series.